Informationen zu. Wir haben gestern hier ein Wiki-Speed-Auto zusammengebaut, es wurden Spritzpistolen gebaut und alles in Sprints, alles mit Scrum orientiert. Es war wirklich viel Spaß, insbesondere gestern Abend haben wir hier eine hervorragende Panel-Discussion. Die wurde auch aufgezeichnet. Also für alle die nicht gesehen haben, Sie werden wahrscheinlich die Möglichkeit haben, die irgendwo nochmal zumindest in Fragmenten zu sehen auf ein Video, den wir vermutlich auf die Scrum-Day Webseite auch irgendwann mal stellen, wenn er zusammengeschnitten ist, damit wir da noch ein bisschen was sehen können. Ich halte mich relativ kurz, weil jetzt auch gleich der erste Vortrag beginnt, und zwar mit einer ganz speziellen Person. Jetzt möchte ich ganz klein ein bisschen was zu meiner Person erzählen. Ich habe nämlich denjenigen kennengelernt, als ich bei meiner allerersten Firma gearbeitet habe, die hieß damals Software Corporation. Das war eine Firma, die hat sich mit einer Smalltalk-Entwicklungsplattform beschäftigt und da gab es die Gruppe innerhalb dieser Firma, die hat ein Modellierungstool on top dieser Smalltalk-Entwicklungsplattform gebaut. Und dann hatte ich die Chance, den Projektleiter, so nannte man die damals, kennenzulernen. Und zwar auf der CeBIT. Das war, glaube ich, 1994 oder 95, irgendwie sowas. Und Jahre später habe ich dann irgendwann, als ich konfrontiert wurde mit so einem Thema wie Scrum und Agilität, festgestellt, dass genau dieser Mann derjenige oder als geistlicher Vater gilt von dem, was wir heute hier mehr oder weniger, warum wir heute hier sind, sage ich mal, ja. Scrum nämlich. Und das war Dr. Jeff Sutherland. So now I switch to English. Jeff, I just explained where we met. So a couple of years ago now. And I'm so glad to have him here, the father of Scrum, let's say, the inventor of Scrum, and you did it at Enfin Times at Easel with the guys in Boston. So please come on stage.
Yes, thank you. We're going to talk about Scrum and Scale this morning because that's a big topic of conversation, and it's really more about getting the leadership agile than it is about Scrum. I have a small company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right across the street from MIT. We do a lot of training and work with large companies. We also do a lot of publishing. We published 3 books in the last couple of years, and we have a hardware practice. Joe Justice has been here building cars with Scrum. Perfect place to do it in Stuttgart. Our clients, we noticed, have very different approaches to scaling. So if you look, we work with large defense contractors. One of them lost a big, almost $500 million radar contract to a Scrum bid from Lockheed, a half-price bid. And the government told them they would never get another contract unless they were half price. So they came to us and they said, we have to implement Scrum. We have no choice, we won't have any more business. But not only that, everything has to be half price. It can't just be Agile where everybody does whatever they want. It actually has to deliver at half price. Because if we bid $500 million and it costs us $1 billion, we're going to be out of business. These are all fixed price contracts. So they have a very different attitude towards scaling. It started from the top down. There was a lot of work on metrics, because how are we going to be reporting to the government? And then how do we then go down into the teams and get them working? On the other hand, another one of our clients, Autodesk, is a very different client. They're the #1 company in their business. And their problem is startups. Every time there's a startup that starts gaining any market share, they buy them. What they're afraid of is that there's going to be a Google of AutoCAD that they can't buy. And so they need to move away from their traditional way of working into a much more innovative approach to Scrum. So their work was, how do we get the teams? They said, we've been doing for Scrum for 6 years, but it's not good enough. Everybody does Scrum. We've got to do Scrum as good as the startups that we're buying. And that means we need to be more innovative. We need to be more like Spotify, which is a natively agile company. We won't have much time to talk about them today, but whatever they do, whatever Spotify is doing is definitely not safe, okay? So, whereas the defense contractor, they like safe. They're using it. Here's what I Hendricks, I work regularly with Henrik Nieberg, and the Spotify issue is all about innovation, and that's where Autodesk wants to get. Predictability, 100% predictable, is zero innovation. So the challenge is how do you innovate? We're discussing that with people from Siemens this morning. It requires a different approach. This chart has been useful for thinking about this. You know, some people are focused on innovation, and some people are focused on just getting a clear, specific implementation of the product. Some people are focused on continuously improving their process, which means the process would always be being tuned up, and other people want to follow the rules and have a very standard process. And, you know, Microsoft has been kind of down here getting killed by Apple, so they want to move. You know, the players we talked about, our defense contractor is down here. They actually want to get more predictable and more rigorous in the way they're working. If they're going to build a destroyer or a new missile system, they want to get very specific and very predictable. But on the other hand, Autodesk, they want to be more up, they want to move up into this corner. Spotify is already up there, very happy. And Microsoft wants to get there before Apple crushes them, and so forth. So companies have different attitudes, different approaches. When they start focusing on scaling, the defense contractor, it was all about how are they going to get the contracts and report to the government on these huge fixed price contracts. With Autodesk, it's how do we get the teams really more agile, more Scrum-like? How do we move impediments up through the system? How do we train management to transform the company? So there was management training as well as team training to get the whole thing working. Whereas Spotify is more about the teams are autonomous and they're innovating and they're releasing, and how do they get the vision of the company so that the teams follow it. And it's very interesting. The CEO has initiatives each year. He's got about 5 of them right now. They're made visible. They don't tell anybody to do anything. The teams just self-organize around the leadership's vision. Very different approach from the military. And as people go along, they'll systematically fill in the other pieces of this, other pieces that you need to get things to work at scale. We'll talk a little bit about this. Now, when we wrote the Agile Manifesto in 2001, the first day we got together, we argued all day about what we were going to call what we were doing. And by the end of the day, we decided we'd call it Agile. And the reason was this book called Agile Competitors. Whoops, how did we lose that? And the book was 100 hardware companies that said they were agile because they were first lean, but then they involved the customer directly in product creation. And they said it's not any more expensive to manufacture that way, but it does require major changes in organization, in management philosophy and operations. So if you're going to be agile at scale, that means the leadership of the company has to do a complete reset in the whole way they think. And a lot of that reset is all around, the focus is eliminating waste. So as companies grow, they start to get more and more rules and regulations and policies. And they get more and more and more. It's like barnacles on a ship. And so the major focus of leadership needs to be to start to remove the barnacles before the ship sinks. You know, of the Fortune 100 companies today, you know, in 10 years, most of them will be gone because the barnacles will sink them. So in order to do that, they need to understand how to analyze a value stream of a company end to end, and how to identify the bottlenecks, identify the wait time, and systematically remove all the things that are slowing the company down. They need to implement what Toyota calls single piece continuous flow. We're going to take something with a team, and they've got to get that done. And then they're going to do another one, and another one, and another one at a time. So scaling really starts, in my view, with leadership development. As I said, it's not so much about Scrum, it's about the leadership and how they think and how they act. And so what we're talking about are the pieces that need to be dealt with when you have Scrum in the large. And we have in Silicon Valley now thousands and thousands of Scrum teams. I've been in dozens of teams in companies in Silicon Valley, and the smallest number of teams I saw in the companies I've been in was 200. It's mind-boggling. Now, unfortunately, they're not doing it very well, most of them. So there needs to be a lot of work, but companies have trouble getting a strategic vision and prioritizing. And then they have trouble managing the priorities across the company and prioritizing the portfolio, and then moving that portfolio into the release process and getting that delivered into the team so you have a really good backlog. So this is like the product owner cycle. The teams need to be released. A lot of companies have these huge release process overheads. And they need to move more to, like Spotify has a little box with a green button on it. And when they want to deploy, it has a joystick. They select the build and they hit the green button and it's live. And the only goal of DevOps in Spotify is to make sure that green button always works no matter who pushes it. They do not get in the way or touch anything with the actual release process. But if you look at a lot of what people are doing, this is like a huge problem. You know, Skype had the problem, it couldn't release anything in less than 7 months. It's not atypical for big telecom companies. So, you know, removing the overhead and the waste in these systems is huge. The product goes out to the customer feedback. How do you get customer feedback and adapt the company fast enough to stay ahead of your competition? The Scrum Master cycle is floating impediments up. They should be able to float smoothly right to the very top for removal. And how do you coordinate across many, many, many teams? So these are things that every way of approach to this has to deal with these pieces, okay? And each one of these pieces has goals, it has inputs, it has outputs. For each of these pieces, it has deliverables. And when you go into these pieces in companies, you find out they're not delivering. So for example, in Silicon Valley, every time I get a room like this, and I ask, how many people have working software at regular intervals? We asked this last night. There's a lot of people that don't. The Scrum Guide says at the end of every sprint, you have a shippable product increment. That means working software. It's tested. The customer can use it and give you feedback. The feedback loop is really important. That's the second principle of the Agile Manifesto, working software. So if 80% of the teams in Silicon Valley have not met the second principle of the Agile Manifesto, are they agile? They're saying they're agile, but they're not. Okay? These are the kind of problems that leadership needs to fix. So we need to develop leadership skills. And here's the way that I've thought about this even back when we were starting Scrum. I was working with the object management group and talking about this. We published several papers. You know, if you look at Moore's law, this is Moore's diagram, and it shows you the number of transistors on a chip and the cost per transistor. And over time, the cost per transistor goes down with bigger and bigger numbers of transistors on a chip. That's why your laptop gets twice as fast and costs half as much every year. The problem is, if you look at this paper, that the increase in production in software has been really, really slow compared to the improvement in hardware. So we have this gap. How are we going to close the gap? And that was one of the driving forces in creation of Scrum. How do we get the cost per story in a sprint, the average cost of a story per sprint, to get lower and lower and lower with more and more stories in a sprint? So, you know, in the beginning state, you might get 10 stories in a sprint, and they cost a lot. But then as you get you really start to get working software, you get things ready, all of a sudden you got a lot more stories in a sprint. And they only cost half as much. And, you know, you start implementing continuous deployment and continuous delivery, you're going to double up again. So we want to drive that curve down with not only the Scrum process, but the tools and techniques that are introduced into the implementation. That's the goal. And if you have good leadership, it helps really drive that. In the venture group I work with, we have about $1 billion invested in dozens of late-stage startups, large startups. The CEO of our venture firm looked at Scrum and he said, hey, you know, Scrum makes everything go faster. We need to implement Scrum everywhere. So in the entire venture group, there is no one that is not on a Scrum team. After running hundreds of sprints, they analyzed the data because all the data is collected in one of our tools. One of our companies that we funded is version 1. He noticed that some of the teams were still had this, you know, working long hours, this old mentality, and they were slow, but the teams doing Scrum well were working, you know, their peak of production. He looked at, you know, how many hours a week do you work to peak production using Scrum? It turned out to be less than 40 hours. So we pulled the whole company together and said, we're going to get rid of all this late nights and weekends. If you do that, you're going to be a bad person from now on. Everybody's going to work a normal work week and double production. And when one team did it, he said, you clearly didn't do that. He said, you clearly don't understand Scrum. You broke up the team. He said, I'm going to put you on the fast teams. You're going to take your backlog with you. And by the time he was done, every single team tripled production. Okay? You're not going to get that without strong leadership that sets the bar high and makes sure that people are focused and implementing well. Now, Professor Carter at Harvard has been doing a lot of work for decades on change management. This is a graph from one of his books. He says, what you need is, you know, you need leadership and management. You know, if you have no management, you're disorganized, and no leadership, you're doomed. There's a lot of doomed companies out there. And it doesn't matter how good you are. Nokia was number 1. They're gone. Most of the companies we work with are very bureaucratic. They might have good management, but they have no leadership because they can't change fast. So the best companies today are well-led, energetic, adaptable. You know, in the States, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Facebook dominate everything. They're all agile and they have agile leadership. The leadership acts agile. So that makes them very difficult to compete with. And Professor Carter's noticed that the big challenge for companies, particularly large companies, is they have this, you know, multi-billion-dollar hierarchy that's generating all the money. They don't want to disrupt it. So he says he's seeing the most success when they, you know, they're getting stalled with, particularly with new product development, so they can't compete unless they get an Agile component in the company. So he's finding they have the most success if they built out a completely separate structure that's Agile. It's like running two operating systems. You know, the old one is Windows, and the new one's the Mac OS. And it has completely different rules. So everything has to be changed. The OS calls are all different. So here's a question on Stack Overflow from a Windows developer. I'm a Windows developer and I want to go to Mac. What should I do? And the answer is, well, the Mac framework is a very different way of thinking. And you'll do much better if you learn this new way of thinking, because it's a different mindset. And if you don't have this new way of thinking, you'll be in a constant struggle, and you'll never get a good implementation. You know, if you write the Windows-style code, you'll always be fighting the new framework. I see that so much in Agile implementations companies. They're trying to be Agile, but they're trying to do it with the old way. It's a constant uphill battle, and they never get the results they want. But if you get into this new mindset, it's amazingly fast to program in Cocoa compared to being buried in C# in Windows. Okay? But it requires a whole shift in the way you think and approach. So these people in the new operating system, it's a good idea if they're volunteers and they're completely retrained for their headset. They operate completely differently. And everybody understands that is a different operation and we are not doing it the same way. And the leadership at the top needs to intervene if somebody's messing up the new operating system. So General Electric's done a pretty good job of this. They decided to invest $1 billion in an internal startup, and 3 years later they had $1 billion worth of revenue. And they have about 1,000 of what they call these fast works initiatives based on the lean startup. And if they run into a bureaucratic problem at the team level, the CEO of GE comes down and crushes the bureaucracy. That's what's needed. You cannot tolerate the bureaucracy messing up the initiatives running in the new operating system. And unless the leadership right at the top is going to intervene, it's not going to work. Now, most of the companies we see when we start off, they implement what we call fragile. Okay? Our problem is the teams aren't fast enough. So teams run faster. We're going to have the same management hierarchy, all the same rules and procedures. The teams will just run faster. And then they're surprised when it doesn't work very well. You know, Nokia was implementing, actually Nokia Siemens Networks did pretty well. They're still alive. But Nokia Mobile, they were implementing Scrum. But I've talked to a lot of the management there. They said around 2000 they began to have so many layers of management they couldn't make any decisions. And so when the iPhone came out, it was like they were deer in the headlights. They couldn't do anything. So fragile. There's also been a lot of research on, you know, particularly I, as a former fighter pilot and then spending many years in healthcare as a professor in a medical school, I've done a lot of work both on pilot safety and medical safety. And there's been a lot of research on, you know, who is killing people and why are they killing so many people? And the research has found that there are certain organizations that are pathological. People are hoarding information. There's a lot of fear and threat. Anytime something goes wrong, they look for a scapegoat. Okay, this is a company that's going to crash airliners and lose a lot of lose a lot of people in heart surgery. Then you have the most common company, the bureaucratic organization. They want to protect departments, maintain the turf, insist on rules. If you violate them, we need justice. That's the major focus. So to get traction with Agile, you need to move to a generative organization, focus on the mission. Everything's supported data to good component, good performance. The customer first, I'm going to get stuff out there, we're going to really win, and if we're not doing that, there's probably some problems in the system we need to tune up. Okay, so let's focus on the system. If you do this, you'll kill a lot less people. I remember a very big company in the United States, one of the biggest leading software companies. Their lead Agile coach gave a presentation, showed how they went from Waterfall to Scrum, and he said, you know, the thing I can't put in the paper is that the last Waterfall release, 4 people died, and since we implemented Scrum, nobody died. Recently this year, you know, just showing how messed up organizations could be, this is a diagram of interdependencies between teams that caused one of the leading telecom companies to not be able to deliver anything in less than 7 months. You know, what's really becoming apparent as we start to talk about scaling is we always knew we had spaghetti code. But spaghetti organizations are even worse than the spaghetti code. At least you can fix the spaghetti code, but if you have the spaghetti organization, it's impossible to fix the spaghetti code. So the leadership has to fix this. You know, you can't be Agile with that mess out there. And a lot of the companies I work with are very compliance-driven. You know, whether they're building aircraft or they're building, you know, FDA-compliant medical devices, they have all these rules and regulations they need to comply with. And so what I've done is I challenged the compliance people to introduce Agile Compliance. The people have to do things in a way that for FDA is traceable. You can do that with Scrum with 95% less overhead. But the compliance people have to be Agile. So they need to lead the agility, not impede it. They need to understand there's a new operating system. We need new procedures, new ways of getting the compliance. It's totally different. So the companies where it works, what you see is the organization, the managers kind of, the hierarchy tips sideways. So the teams are self-managing, driving out product, and the managers start to support the organization. So like at Spotify, they have these chapters that are cross-cutting. So they'll have an architecture chapter and a lead architect that has architectural representatives on every team and make sure that they're trained properly, that there's architectural standards, all these kind of things. QA manager may be doing the same thing with QA teams. And at Spotify, these guys hire the developers, make sure they're trained right, make sure there's basic engineering standards in place. So you need leadership. Now, to get a Scrum company appraised at CMI level 5, we had to have a role for management. And in the Scrum Guide, we don't say anything about management. So this is the role we came up with. And you'll get appraised at CMI 5 if you do this. You know, the management needs to have challenging goals and a business plan that works. They need to eliminate the spaghetti organization. That's one of their primary roles. And provide the resources the team needs. And they need to identify and remove impediments for the teams. That means they need to know the velocity of the teams. They need to know what's preventing them from going faster. And anything the teams they can't fix themselves, the management needs to be in there clearing the way. Okay. And we focused more on this recently because we found that leadership in Agile organizations is not holding Scrum Masters accountable for improving the process. Like in Silicon Valley, Big companies, Cisco, Ericsson. They have people without working software. They have hundreds of Agile coaches. Every consultant in Silicon Valley has the word Agile on their business card today. And you go into the companies, nobody has working software. I said, why are you hiring these coaches if they don't have working software? They're not doing the job. You need to hold these people accountable. Two of the biggest companies in Silicon Valley said, we're firing all of them. We're going to hire people internally, we're going to train them to do this right, we're going to hold them accountable. And the product owners, it's even worse. Product owners are responsible for delivery of value. That means revenue for most companies. So in my company, product owners are measured on revenue per point. It's not enough for teams to double performance. The product owner should double the revenue per point. That way, if the teams double, and then the product owners double revenue per point, we have 400% more revenue. Everybody's happy. The investors are happy, the management happy, the people are getting big bonuses for such great performance. That's what we want to see. Now, this is a long way away for most German companies, but there are companies out there that have no management. Here's just a few of them. And some of these are multi-billion-dollar companies. So the teams are driving the product and the teams are driving the strategy. So the future of organizations is evolving. Back when we implemented Scrum, we implemented based on a paper by Professors Takeuchi and Nanaka. Nanaka is one of the leading management gurus on the planet. And if you read his books, you'll see he sees organizations actually splitting into smaller and smaller units. So you begin to get human-sized chunks, 50 to 150. And he has a great example in his book on Flow of a multi-billion-dollar company with these small business units that are self-contained companies, no more than 150 people. And then they swarm together to do big deals. So it's like you get companies as teams swarming on bigger things. So things are going into smaller chunks. And this last year, Hewlett Packard split in half. They said, we're too big. Let's split it in half. It'll be interesting to see if they keep doing that. There's some secrets that we see in good Agile scaling. Like scaling down, not up, is really good. I was at Twitter recently, and they have 2,000 developers. They got a ton of money from going public. And their leadership would like to be doing Scrum, but I asked the developers, what are you doing? They said, oh, we're doing some Kanban. And I said, well, how's it working? And they said, well, everything is stuck in the deployment column. And I said, what are you doing about it? They said, well, we don't know what to do about it. We're hiring 2,000 more developers. Now they're getting in trouble. You're reading in the press, like, they're not delivering, the revenue's not there. They're not thinking clearly. Why don't they double the production of the 2,000 they've got? That would be a lot better than hiring 2,000 more, right? Scaling out. I learned a little bit from Joe Justice, his idea of how we would build cars. You have one team building one car. If you want to build more, you have more shipping containers, and you have a team in each shipping container. If you get 200 of them, you can build 200 cars. Everything's single-piece, continuous flow. And you can scale that indefinitely without having a huge management bureaucracy, right? So scaling out, not up, is a good idea. The other thing we're seeing is that in organizing the teams, it works best if you have a clear, prioritized backlog for the company. Or even if you have a product line, or even a product. And then you get the teams in the room, and you look at the backlog and ask, how should we form teams to maximize the delivery on this backlog. And then you get really good self-organization around the goal, how to deliver. So there's these kind of strategies that need to be embedded in the leadership's thinking. One of the things that I'm really starting to hammer on, it's amazing that you work with very large and successful companies, or even universities, which we're training the whole MIT infrastructure in Scrum. They have a new CIO, and he said, we're going Scrum. And he's a very good leader. He wasn't wishy-washy. He said, we're not only going Scrum, but here's a management workshop. We got all the managers in the room. At the end of the workshop, you're going to have a plan for execution. And so it's all at once. Most organizations can't do that. It requires very strong leadership. But his view is, MIT should be the first agile organization on the planet, right? I mean, we're supposed to be the smart people, not the stupid, slow people, right? At MIT. Well, it turns out to be not so easy because they have like 1,000 projects and they're not prioritized. So we're like, you need the thing that's at the top of the scaling picture, like a leadership action team. Who is going to make sure you get a product owner implementation that can prioritize everything in the organization and have it flow properly? So we're really starting to hammer on this leadership action team. You can't scale unless leadership is actually helping to drive it. Here's the latest data from the Standish Group on Agile versus Waterfall. I just got this a couple of weeks ago, so it's a summary of the last 5 years of over 50,000 projects worldwide. And what it shows is that the difference between Waterfall and Agile has even gotten wider. The success rate for Waterfall today is 11%. For Agile, it's 39%. The failure rate, the total failure rate, the red is like nothing ever gets delivered. Just complete and total waste. 29% Waterfall. 9%, quite a bit better in Agile, but we still do have a bunch of that out there. Some of this, though, are projects that are killed because they're clearly not going to work. But look at this, 52% of Agile cannot deliver on time, cannot have a happy customer, cannot be within budget. These guys are Agile in name only. So we need a leadership action team in companies to fix that. Because, I'm astonished. I've been on 11 senior management teams, and I've implemented Scrum in all these companies. And what I've learned from that is that at the senior management level, you can't tolerate people down there not having working software. That's going to break your company. And yet I go into so many companies and, like, what is the leadership thinking? In our venture group, we don't allow that. That's a board level issue. Our board members come into a board meeting. If they find out that the company doesn't have continuous integration, automated testing, they don't have working software, that is a really bad board meeting for the management team. And we will pull the CEO aside and say, if you don't fix this, we're going to be having another CEO. Because we don't invest in companies that are not competitive. So we've actually sold off companies that can't fix this. It wasn't worth fixing the management. You can't wait around for this stuff today in the kind of globally competitive market you are, particularly with a startup. You have to be very, very aggressive. So, what's the responsibility of a leadership action team? Well, if you look at the scaling framework, you'll see it has certain inputs and certain outputs. They need to be looking at the strategy, the market, what's going on in the organization. They need to be looking at the metrics across the organization. There needs to be impediments flowing into them, floating up from the teams, and feedback on things they fix, and ways to measure. Like, one of the biggest companies in the United States, the CIO, who actually has 17 CIOs under him, says, we need to be 50% agile, only 5% agile. And so we're trying to help them do that. But the company has no way to measure whether they're getting better. It's a constant struggle to get them focused. How do we get an intervention in there? How do we measure it? How do we see that the dial is moving? For some reason, the organization cannot bring itself to grips with how they actually measure that. So, coming out of it, there needs to be a vision, a transformation strategy, an executive backlog, that team needs to be working, and so forth. Now, the best way I've seen to say this is in General McChrystals' new book. You know, the U.S. was losing the war in Iraq. The terrorist attacks were escalating every day. And so McChrystal was responsible for all the intelligence special forces. They said, we got to do something different. And they already had moved from a hierarchical structure to a team-based structure, but it wasn't working. And it wasn't working because they didn't have everybody on one team. They had to have all the intelligence services, you know, the CIA, the FBI, NSA, all on one team, along with the SEALs and the Special Forces. And in real time, they need to get the intelligence signals from 100 different directions and launch within the hour a SEAL team. Otherwise, they couldn't stop it. As soon as they realized they needed to move a team to team of teams, these are cross-functional teams. The leadership team is a cross-functional team. They're directly either on or communicating in real time constantly with the teams. So it's all like one intelligent network. So the leadership action team needs to be like this, working with the Scrum of Scrums who are working with the teams. And in real time, within the hour, crushing impediments. So a lot of companies don't seem to get this. And they need to be really aggressive. Sometimes we call this an agile transition team, but I found this is a really bad name because it's not just for the transition. This needs to be a permanent team that's executing constantly. And what happened in Iraq, as soon as the war turned around, they started getting it under control, then the CIA didn't want to talk. We're sharing too much information. You know, we want to go back to our little hierarchies. So now the U.S. is in a dysfunctional state again. We're going to wait for the next crisis for us to lose until people wake up, because there's nobody at a high enough level with an intense enough focus to crush the bureaucracy. So the main thing is that problems need to flow up to that executive team, and they need to act quickly. Just like a GE. Somebody's messing with a FastWorks initiative to build new refrigerators, and there's some bureaucratic thing in the company. You know, they don't work through a management structure to figure out how to fix this. The CEO comes down that day and crushes it. We're not going to tolerate that stuff. FastWorks means fast. It means everybody gets out of the way. Now, you can operationalize this for ongoing operation of the company. I've seen this done very well in some companies with what we call a meta scrum. And that means that you have a team that meets on regular cycles in the startups or advanced stage startups, usually once a week. with the key members of senior management, the product owner team, the Scrum Master team. And in that, they evaluate where are we in terms of our strategic direction, all the sprints in action. Do we need to change anything? Is the competition doing something that causes us to want to change our direction in sprints? Do we need more people in one area than another? Do we need some money for servers and this and that? Do we need to change the management in the organization? And in that meeting every week, the CEO is in that meeting as a facilitative leader. He's kind of like the Scrum Master. The Chief Product Owner is leading. And the CEO, any impediments that come up to that meeting, before 5 o'clock that day, they're fixed, including changing management. That really works. So this is a way to really operationalize this. So you meet regularly, make sure everything is working on all the teams, and you constantly tune in the organization. So here's the kind of impediments that the leadership action team needs to crush. How many people have too many projects in your pipeline? Everybody, right? Who's going to fix that? Right? That needs to be fixed from the top. How many have everything top priority? You can't run a company like that. I mean, what are people thinking? How about lack of understanding of Scrum among the management team? Anybody have that problem? Yeah. Or the management is afraid, I don't want to really expose my information, I might look bad, or I'm really worried about my job, if we get Agile, then my job might change. Who's going to fix that? No continuous integration automated testing. Coaches, Scrum Masters not servicing impediments. Management not focused on removing waste. There's lots of work for this group to do. Here's a few things that when we met with the management of Autodesk, they actually had this list. They said, okay, what do we need to do with reporting? It needs to totally change. Well, last year, the CMI5 Scrum company in Denmark, the senior management team, which runs as a Scrum, evaluated the return on investment of every report and every meeting, particularly the ones that they went to, because senior management meetings are very expensive. And they decided that none of them met the return on investment required other than the Scrum meetings, and they banned all reports and meetings other than the Scrum ones. Okay, that's leadership. Recruiting. You need to hire people who can work on teams. It's been really funny working with HR departments, because they say, oh, we've been hiring the smartest developers we can, We thought they worked in their cube, you slid food under the door. They never had to talk to anyone. But now we realize that they actually have to talk to other people and work with them. Okay, we could do just as good a job as hiring smart people that can talk to each other as hiring smart people who can't. So it was quite easy to change the hiring policy. Incentive plans. They need to change, move the team base. Performance appraisals, gets rid of them. Google doesn't have them. If Google doesn't have them, why do you have them? Google's winning. Have you noticed that? Space. Okay, so all of these things need to change in leadership. What we need to do, and this is what I'm focused on, because I want people to get the benefits of Scrum that we achieved with the first Scrum team. And that means you need to implement an aggressive Scrum. And a really good metaphor for that is, here's the team, whether it's a leadership action team or the Scrum team. The Scrum Master is in front, breaking the resistance, right? That's hard, and the faster you go, the more resistance there is. Have you noticed that? The Scrum Master needs to be out there creating a wig that the team can go through. And that Scrum Master is going to get tired, and as soon as he needs to move to the back and put another Scrum Master in there. That's aggressive Scrum. It's different than most of what's going on out there. Okay? So that's my message today. We're doing a 2-day workshop on this. We're going to be doing it in Boston, Silicon Valley, and Stockholm in the next few months. Maybe Jean-Pierre will get us back here in Germany doing it sometime. So that's my message. I think it's really great. Scrum is expanding in Germany. Jean-Pierre is inviting us over more and more often. I hope to see all of you again soon.
Jeff, thanks a lot, and again, being here, it's really great. I know Ali wants you more in Boston.
Yeah, right.
It's great that it's still coming every year. I think this is the 5th Scrum-Day you're joining, right? Perfect. Once again, make some noise for Jeff. What we are now going to do, we split up in the different rooms. The next speeches will directly follow after this keynote right now. I think Jeff will be here.